Hello, this is Waugh Gaming, and welcome to a quick little tutorial here on texture tiling and how to hide it. So, if you don't know what texture tiling is, it's basically when you have these big lines or easy to recognize shapes in a texture and you can tell that's being repeated over and over again. And that's really present in a lot of TF2's textures, unfortunately. But there are some ways to kind of mitigate and hide that, and that's what I'm going to be going over here. So let's show you the first way. Alright, so the first option you have when hiding texture tiling is kind of varying the form of your building through changing brushwork and making your geometry just a bit more complex. So what I've kind of done here, as you can see, is I've added kind of a almost like a shed entrance here. I've actually went ahead and put in like a rolling door, which kind of breaks this building up a bit more and hides the texture tiling a bit. And then also sunk in part of this building back. Ignore the roof, that's a bit messed up, but that's not really what I'm focusing on here. So if you kind of look at it from different angles, it kind of hides it a bit better, although you can still kind of see it there, and I'm going to kind of touch on that a little bit later. But that is your first option, so varying the form of your building. Only drawbacks here are that it can take a bit more time, not always viable in a gameplay space. You might have your building shaped because it actually should be like that for gameplay purposes. And it also can increase your brush count, just depending on how you're doing it and if they're blocking sightlines or not. Alright, so on to option number 2. Another possible option is using props and overlays to hide texture tiling and vary up the building, and also helps to make it a bit more interesting. So for instance, we can see I've done here is I've smacked some windows on there, which definitely I would say helps to kind of cover it up and draw your eye away from the metal texture. I've also added a gutter, a keep out sign, Red Valley mining sign, as well as keeping those kind of doors to serve that same kind of purpose. Cons of this option are that it can make your building a bit too interesting if you're worried about density of detail and you want only your most interesting buildings and your most gameplay important buildings to have the most props. Then this can kind of draw your eye away from there. It can also obviously increase prop count, but that's usually not too big of a deal. But it does help to keep your buildings within a gameplay shape, but just make them a bit more visually appealing. So another possible option is to skew parts of your textures by making them into multiple brushes. Now this isn't super preferable, but as you can see, it does help to hide it a good amount and make it look a lot more random. However, this option definitely has the most cons, at least in my opinion, out of all of them. Some of those being that it can be a bit more tedious to have to go up and do all this texture alignment manually. It also doesn't work with a lot of textures. It works pretty with the sheet metal texture, but with things like bricks, you can't really align them without them looking weird. Textures that have little like strips of dirt on the top or rust dripping down from the top, that doesn't work usually very well either. So it's pretty limited in that regard. And of course, it also increases your brush count pretty dramatically, once again, depending on if they're blocking sightlines or whatnot, and some detail. So it's not the most preferable option in the world, but it is always out there. So to summarize, I would say generally speaking the best option overall isn't just using one of them, but combining all three of them to varying degrees. So as you can see here, I still have the windows from option B, varied geometry from option A, a little bit here, and then also I went ahead and skewed just a few of the brush faces textures to align them to left or right, top to bottom, things like that. And I think overall this kind of strikes the best balance between workload and payoff, as well as a little bit more realism. Oftentimes in buildings you will have a few shapes sticking out, some windows obviously, things like that. However, before this video ends, I would like to mention that having texture tiling isn't always the worst thing in the world, in the sense that you can often use it to your advantage for things like density of detailing, which I'm a bit advocate of in TF2. In the sense that if you have a repeated pattern, your eye will often pay less attention to it, especially if it's already in the distance. So if you're using it for like out of bounds buildings, oftentimes that's totally fine. If you look at Dust Bowl, 2 Fort, things like that, they have a lot of very boring areas outside of bounds, which I think is great, actually. And also, TF2 does have a very painterly style, so it can be fine to have a few kind of repeating textures and whatnot, just depending on the case, for what that texture is specifically, as far as making it look like broader brush strokes, things like that. So ultimately, this is just kind of a summary of what I like to do, what I'm detailing, and how I like to flesh out a little bit of a building here, make it look a bit more interesting without interfering with the gameplay necessarily. So if you guys enjoyed watching, let me know. I'd love to make some more of these little mini art passing tutorials, because that's kind of my specialty with TF2 mapping. And until next time, goodbye.